Hey guys, welcome to Mild Moments History. Tonight you're not in your bed. You're lying on rough straw in a stone chamber with no window. The candle by your side is burning low and your body is still trembling from the last training. You close your eyes, but sleep won't come. Not when every breath smells of leather dust and cold metal. You are only 13, and already they call you Mamluk, a name that means owned. They bought you far from here across a sea your mother never saw. They stripped your name, gave you armor too big for your bones, and whispered one day you could be king. But tonight, you are still a boy, alone, far from everything soft and known. The barracks creak above you. Another boy is crying quietly, and the stars outside Cairo do not blink. So breathe. Let your body sink. You're not free, but you're alive. And in this strange place, even a slave may rewrite the fate of an empire. You wake before the sun, not because you want to, but because someone stomped past your mat in the dark. Boots on stone, no words, just a grunt and the scrape of iron. This is your new home, a room with no windows, no warmth, and no one who knows your name. The walls sweat at night. You've learned not to touch them. They're always damp, always cold. 12 boys sleep here, but it's never quiet. Someone always breathes too loud. Someone always whispers prayers in a language not yours. Someone always dreams of running back, but no one ever does. Your mat is thin. The floor underneath is not. You roll onto your side and feel the straw shift beneath your ribs. It pokes, it itches. It smells like the stable old hay horse urine and leather oil. The blanket they gave you is stiff, still crusted with the sweat of a boy before you. There are hooks on the far wall. They hang swords that no one here is strong enough to lift. A rusted helmet sits beside a bowl of water, not for drinking, just for splashing your face before dawn drills. The door creaks open when the sun finally peeks in through the courtyard. But you don't need the light. You've memorized every crack in the ceiling, every footstep on the stairs, every whisper in the dark. And every night before sleep takes you, if it ever does, you trace the line between who you were and who they say you must become. They feed you just enough, not too much, just enough to stand, just enough to lift the wooden sword again. Breakfast is always the same. A ladle of lentils boiled until they forget their shape. Sometimes there's bread round, flat hard, at the edges. It smells faintly of ash and old grain. You learn to soak it in the broth to soften it, even if the broth tastes like iron. The bowl is wood, the spoon is your hand. You sit on the floor with the other boys. No one speaks, not here. The only sound is chewing, swallowing, and the occasional cough. You don't look up, because once you did. And the boy across from you stared back with eyes like knives. You're always a little hungry, not starving, just aware. Your stomach never growls, but it never feels full. It's a quiet kind of hunger. One that teaches you to move slower, to breathe less, to wait. Sometimes they give you olives, or a date. Just one. It tastes like sunlight and disappears in seconds. You roll the pit in your palm until a trainer barks and you drop it. No spices, no sugar, no mother's hand, just fuel. And yet, every meal is a lesson. Not about food, but about obedience. You don't remember when you stopped asking questions. Maybe it was the first time the teacher hit your fingers with a stick. Or maybe it was when you watched an older boy dragged out for laughing during prayer. No one saw him again. No one asked where he went. Every morning you recite the verses. You don't understand all the words yet, but you learn the rhythm, the rise and fall, the pauses where silence is required. And that's enough for now. You nod when they say God is watching. You bow when they say obedience is worship, and you close your eyes when they whisper, even a slave has a soul. There is a man who comes every Friday. He wears black robes and speaks slowly, like each word is heavy with meaning. You don't know his name, but you fear his voice. It sinks into the stone and doesn't leave even after he's gone. You've seen the punishments, the kneeling, the lashes, the long silences that follow. So you fold your hands. You keep your eyes low. You whisper what you're told, hoping it's enough. They say faith will make you strong, but here, belief isn't something you feel. It's something you perform, like sword drills or silence. And sometimes, when you wake in the dark, you try to remember what you used to believe in, before they gave you new words, before they gave you new gods. But the memory slips, like sand in water. Something's different. You feel it in the way the officers walk faster, in the way the trainers speak quieter, but harsher. Even the cook didn't look up today, just sloshed lentils into your bowl and moved on. They say winter is coming, but in Cairo, winter doesn't scream. It whispers. The air gets sharper, but not freezing. The sky turns gray, but not dark. It's not the kind of cold that hurts. It's the kind that warns. The drills are longer now. You run until your breath feels like fire. You fall, you get up, you fall again. No one helps you. That's part of the lesson. One of the older boys limps. He tries to hide it, but the captain saw, and now he's not at morning lineup. Last night, the sergeant walked through the hall. He stopped by each mat, looked, didn't speak. His boots left muddy marks even on your blanket. And this morning, a new word was scratched into the board near the courtyard. Selection. You don't know what it means, but your stomach sank when you read it. And tonight, when the lamps go out and the others fall asleep, you stay awake staring at the ceiling cracks, counting them, the same way you count breaths, the same way you count days, waiting for one to change. It wasn't sharp, not yet. They didn't trust you with that kind of danger. But still, when the sword was placed in your hand, your fingers curled around it like it was alive. The wood was dry and splintered, wrapped in old leather at the grip. It had seen more boys than you could count. It smelled of oil sweat and something metallic that shouldn't be there. And it was heavy. Not too heavy to lift, but too heavy to forget. You stood in a row of 11, each boy holding a practice sword, each one pretending not to shake. The courtyard was stone. Pale dust. No shadows yet. The sun hadn't cleared the roof tiles, but the trainer was already shouting. Your knees ached from yesterday, but you didn't dare adjust your stance. The first boy who moved got the flat of a real blade across his ankle. Not to cut, just to remind, this was not a game. You remember the command, grip it, like it owes you your life. So you did. You gripped until your knuckles turned white, until the splinters pushed tiny lines into your palms, until your arms trembled, and then stopped. They taught you how to breathe with it, how to lift from the shoulder, not the wrist, how to keep the point aimed at nothing and everything, how not to blink when the blow came toward your face. That first strike missed you. You flinched anyway. The second one didn't miss. It caught your ribs with a dull thud that made your lungs forget how to work. You dropped the sword. It clattered on the stone. Everyone looked. The trainer didn't yell. He just walked over, slow and silent, picked up the sword, and handed it back. Hold it again. You did, this time with both hands. You remember how your breath slowed, how your heart thudded in your ears. You thought maybe, if you gripped hard enough, the blade would fuse with your skin and never fall again. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of dust and bruises. Your arms burned, your vision swam, but you kept going. Because the sword wasn't just wood anymore. It was a promise, a line between boy and Mamluk, between captive and something else. That night, you didn't sleep right away. You lay on your mat staring at the ceiling again. Your hands throbbed raw where the leather had rubbed. You didn't cry. You didn't smile. You just whispered once to no one. I held it. They didn't ask. They never do. One morning, a man in black robes called out a name. It was short, sharper than your real one. It didn't sound like the syllables your mother used when she called you in from the fields. It didn't hold the soft rise. At the end, the kindness baked into its vowels. This one snapped like leather. It had weight, but no warmth. From now on, he said, this is who you are. You didn't nod. You didn't speak. You just stood there, and the sound settled on your shoulders like a second skin. The other boys looked at you, not with cruelty, just curiosity. Another name, another number in the order of things. They carved it onto your wooden bowl, burned it onto the inside of your belt, scribed it in chalk above the mat where you sleep. You tried saying it once softly to yourself, in the quiet space before drills when only the birds stirred in the rafters. It felt foreign, too dry in your mouth, too angular for the voice you once knew as your own. That night, you dreamed of your old name. Someone whispered it, a woman's voice maybe, but when you turned, no one was there. Only the walls, only the wind through the stones. Weeks passed, and the new name began to stick. Not because it fit, but because no one used the old one anymore, not even in your thoughts. You started responding to it without flinching. When called, you stepped forward. When written, you recognized the shape. It became a shield thin, but serviceable. A way to survive, a way to be counted and not lost. But some days when the air smells like wet clay, or when the call to prayer echoes strangely off the southern wall, you feel a small pull. Something buried, like a name carved into wood, and then sanded smooth. You know it was there, but you can't quite read it anymore, and maybe that's the point. It started with a bucket, cold water, no words. You were told to kneel. The man behind you wore no armor, no badge, just an old knife with a handle wrapped in cloth. He dipped the blade into a bowl, not to clean it, just to soften what it would drag across your skin. You closed your eyes before he touched you, but not fast enough to miss the glint of metal, not quick enough to avoid the sound, the soft scrape of edge meeting scalp. The first strip was behind your ear. You felt it more than heard it, a tug, then a sudden lightness, then another. It wasn't painful, not really, but it was humiliating. Like peeling away something you didn't agree to give up. The other boys had already gone through it. You'd seen their smooth skulls shining under the sun during drills. You knew yours would look like that soon. You just didn't know how it would feel. The blade moved in slow, rough paths. Not careful, not cruel, just indifferent. The man hummed to himself. Something without a tune, maybe a habit, maybe a way to pretend he wasn't cutting away someone's past. You tried not to move, tried not to breathe. But when he reached the crown of your head, something inside you clenched like your body understood more than your thoughts could. You remembered your mother braiding your hair, her fingers swift and warm, the way she muttered about wind-knot spirits, the way she always tied the end with red string. There was no red string now, only hair falling in clumps onto stone, dark and soft, like pieces of someone else's memory. When it was done, he poured more water over you, didn't wipe the blade, didn't say anything, just pointed toward the polished piece of brass hanging on the wall. You stood, walked slowly, looked. At first, you thought it was someone else, a stranger, a face stretched longer, eyes too large without lashes to frame them, cheeks bare and pale, a skull where your head used to be. You reached up fingertips, touching skin instead of strands. The cold met you instantly. You looked again, tilted slightly. And that's when it struck you. You couldn't remember the last time you saw your own reflection. Back home there was no mirror, just the river. And even then, the water was never still long enough to show you clearly. Here in the fortress, they gave you steel. They gave you rules. They gave you a name that wasn't yours. And now, they gave you a face to match. You used to cry every night, not loudly, just enough to taste the salt, just enough to let your pillow catch the sound. You didn't want the others to hear, not because they'd mock you, they wouldn't. They'd just look at you with eyes too tired to judge, too hollow to care. So you learned how to cry quietly, how to turn your face toward the wall, how to bite your sleeve, how to keep the sobs small and shallow. It became part of the rhythm, lights out, one deep breath, one slow tear, sleep if it comes. But then came the night it didn't. You lay in the dark, just like always, back sore from drills, legs aching from the climb, stomach full enough to forget it had once been empty. The boy beside you had a fever. You could hear him shift, whispering something in a language you didn't understand. He didn't cry either, just trembled. And you just listened. You stared at the beam overhead, The same beam you'd counted every knot in. The same one where a spider spun the slowest web you'd ever seen. Your eyes didn't sting. Your throat didn't tighten. The tears never came. You thought at first you were broken, that something inside had finally dried up. So you waited for the ache, waited for the sob, waited for that thin thread of grief to tug at your ribs. But all that came was breath, soft, steady, almost peaceful. Not because you were fine, not because it didn't hurt anymore, but because it didn't help anymore. Crying hadn't saved you, hadn't sent you home, hadn't stopped the drills or softened the sword. It had only made the nights longer. And so that night, you didn't cry. You simply lay still, eyes open, chest rising, body quiet. You listened to the courtyard wind tapping against the shutters. You counted the footsteps of the patrol outside. You felt the weight of your own bones sinking into the mat. And somewhere between one breath and the next, you slipped into sleep, dry-eyed still and strangely steady. The morning came like it always did, loud, demanding, unforgiving. But when you stood, when you tied your sash, when you picked up your training blade, your hands didn't shake. Not because you were brave, not because you no longer missed home, but because you'd learned something deeper than fear. Sometimes survival is silence, and some nights silence is enough. It wasn't a reward. You knew that the moment it happened. The trainer didn't smile, didn't nod, just pointed at you with two fingers and said front. You froze, only for a second. Then your feet moved like they had learned to do without your permission. The sun wasn't up yet. The courtyard still held the cold of night, but the dust was already dry beneath your soles. 12 boys behind you, all waiting, all watching. Some with curiosity, some with bruises darker than yours. One or two with that look, the one that says, "Why him?" You didn't know why. You weren't the fastest, weren't the strongest, weren't the one who shouted the loudest during drills. But maybe you were the one who never fell. Or maybe it was just your turn. Call the rhythm, the trainer said. You opened your mouth. No words came. Your tongue felt like a stone. He didn't wait, didn't bark, just gave a single nod, and the stick in his hand tapped once against his boot. You copied it. Step, strike, reset. Your voice didn't sound like yours. It came from somewhere deeper, from the part of you that had stopped crying, from the boy who held a wooden sword like it meant something. The boys moved. Slowly at first. One missed a beat. Another turned the wrong way. You repeated the call, louder this time. Not shouting, just steady, unshakable. Step, strike, reset. Again, again, again. Until your own legs forgot they were sore. Until your voice became the metronome of the morning. Until the trainer stepped back not far, but far enough to let you lead. There was no praise, no nod of approval, no word of encouragement. When it ended, the boys filed past you without speaking. Except one, a small one, newer than you, eyes downcast, lips dry. As he passed, he said barely a whisper, "Your timing is good." That was all, but it stayed with you longer than any bruise. Later that day, they gave you a new strap for your sandals. Nothing special, just leather that didn't crack when you walked, but it fit. And that night, as you lay on your mat arms, aching, voice hoarse, you stared at the ceiling and said the drill to yourself one more time. Step, strike, reset. And for the first time since arriving, you let yourself wonder what it might feel like to lead for real. Not just drills, but men, into battle, into history. It was small, hardly worth remembering. A cut, no more than 2 inches, on the outside of your left foot, just below the ankle bone. It happened during drills, a misstep. You turned too fast. The boy behind you didn't stop his swing. The wooden blade wasn't sharp, but it was fast and heavy and full of someone else's panic. It caught you just as you were resetting your stance. You didn't fall, didn't cry out, but you staggered just a little. That was enough. The trainer noticed. His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Instead, he walked past you slowly and stopped by the boy who hit you. The punishment wasn't for hurting you. It was for breaking rhythm. The boy was made to run the wall path 10 times barefoot. You said nothing. That night, you washed the wound in cold water. The basin in the corner stung like winter breath. There was no bandage, only a torn strip from the inside of your tunic. You wrapped it tight, said nothing to the others, not even to the boy who had hit you. He never looked at you again. Days passed. The skin swelled, then split, then scabbed. You limped in silence, grinding your teeth every time your foot hit the ground. But you did not slow down. You did not ask to be excused, because asking meant weakness, and weakness meant watching someone else take your place. Eventually, the pain dulled. The scab hardened, then cracked and fell away. What remained was a thin line, pale against your skin, angled like the blade that had made it. No one noticed. No one ever mentioned it. But you saw it, every morning as you tightened your straps, every night as you lay still, waiting for sleep. A reminder, not of pain, but of endurance. You never told anyone what it meant, never gave it a name. But sometimes, when drills grew too long, when the courtyard dust filled your mouth, when your legs trembled beneath the weight of duty, you looked down, saw the line, and remembered. You bled here, and you kept going. That scar was not your first, and it would not be your last. But it was the first one you earned without tears, and that meant something. The first time it happened, you woke up confused. You had been dreaming, that much you were sure of. The sky was orange. You were standing in a field you didn't recognize, but your feet knew the earth. A woman was calling out to you, but the words she used, they weren't hers. They were the new words. Arabic, soft and round, but foreign in her mouth, like someone else had climbed inside her and spoken for her. You woke before you answered, sweat on your neck, hands clenched around the blanket, the boy beside you still breathing slow and steady. You blinked into the dark, trying to recall what she said, the shape of the sentence, the rhythm of the vowels. It was gone, but it had felt warm. That wasn't the last time. As the weeks passed, the dreams returned, always strange, always layered. Sometimes it was your old village, but the goats wore saddles. Sometimes it was the training yard, but the dust smelled like your mother's bread oven. And the words, they came mixed. A command in Arabic, a lullaby in your mother's tongue, a whispered warning in both overlapping. You began to realize your thoughts were changing. Not all at once, but gradually, like sand sifting through fingers. You'd reach for a memory, and the word you needed would be in the wrong voice. You still remembered your old language, but it no longer arrived first. It had to wait, step aside for the new one. You wondered what that meant. Were you forgetting, or simply becoming? In the courtyard, when you were told to shout the drill words, they came easily now. Your tongue didn't stumble, your breath didn't pause. In prayers, you no longer mouthed the syllables. You spoke them, sometimes with meaning, sometimes not, but always clearly. You didn't tell anyone about the dreams. No one asked. And even if they had, you wouldn't have known how to explain. How do you say I dreamed in a voice that isn't mine, but felt like home? Some nights you wished the old language would win. Just once. A full dream, a full sentence, no interruptions. But it never did. The dreams belong to both worlds now. Half truth, half future, entirely yours. And so when the sleep came after the drills, after the pain, after the whispers died down in the dark, you let the dreams come too. You listened, you learned. Because somewhere inside, those tangled voices was the shape of who you were becoming. Not the boy who was taken, not the name they gave you, but something in between. Something that understood both languages and belonged fully to neither. You first noticed them on a quiet morning, the kind with no shouting, no drills, just gray light spilling through the cracks in the shutters. You were cleaning, or pretending to. The brass bowl had already been polished, your boots already lined straight, so you wandered. Not out of defiance, just the soft pull of curiosity. And there, on the back wall of the dormitory, half hidden behind a wooden shelf, no one moved anymore. You saw them. Tiny lines. Not painted, not carved with a blade, just scratched, one at a time, over and over. At first, they seemed random, but as your fingers traced them, you saw the pattern. Groups of 5, 4 short lines, then one crossing through, then again, and again. You counted. 57, then another set, and another. You did the math. Weeks, maybe months. Each group of 5 a measure of time. Not a calendar, a survival map. Someone had lived here before you, slept on the same floor, breathed this same stale air, held their voice back at night, just like you. And they had marked each day, not with a name, not with words, just lines, because sometimes that's all you can carry. You didn't tell anyone, didn't mention it at roll call. You just moved the shelf a little farther so you could see the marks each morning. For the next 3 days you watched them, ran your fingers across them before training, as if touching them gave you something. Then on the 4th morning, you added your own line. One mark, short, quiet, yours. You weren't sure why. You weren't counting time. Not exactly. You didn't know how long you'd been here anymore. It all blurred, one drill, one prayer, one bowl of lentils into the next. But the mark felt solid, like proof that you were still here, still breathing, still you. The next day you added another, and the day after a third. Soon your hand knew the motion by heart, a small flick of your nail, low enough that no one would see, but high enough that you'd always remember where to look. No one noticed, or if they did, they said nothing. And each time you made a mark, you'd look at the older ones, the faded shallow ones, the ones chipped by time and dust. You wondered who had made them, what name they were given, whether they had survived long enough to stop counting, or whether the counting had kept them alive. Some nights lying awake, you'd imagine them beside you, same age, same uniform, same tired breath. And in that strange silence, you didn't feel quite so alone. The wall didn't answer, but it didn't need to. It held the memory, it held the math, and maybe that was enough. They told you not to look. That was the first rule. When the horn sounded, long, low, distant, you were to stop whatever you were doing, step back from the road, bow your head, and keep your eyes down. Not in fear, in respect. At least that's what they said. The courtyard buzzed differently that morning. No shouts, no drills, just a quiet rush of movement. Everyone swept the dust, scrubbed the gateposts, polished helmets that wouldn't be worn. You were told to line up at the edge, back straight, chin tucked, eyes lowered. And wait. You heard the hooves before you saw the dust. Slow, rhythmic, heavy. Not like the training horses. These were armored. You could feel it in the ground. Each step landed like a drumbeat in your chest. He came from the west gate, flanked by guards on either side, silent, identical. And then there he was, the Sultan. Not a statue, not a story, not a name spoken in the barracks. A man, riding a black horse taller than any you'd ever seen, robe dark as ink, shoulders wrapped in fine mail. No crown, no jewels, just presence. The crowd inhaled as one, then held it. He didn't wave, didn't smile. His eyes scanned the line like a knife on a whetstone, and that's when you did it. You looked up, not boldly, not with pride, just enough to see. Your gaze rose slowly, as if drawn by gravity reversed. You passed the horse's flank, the saddle, the gloved hands holding the reins, and then his face. He was older than you imagined, lines deep, eyes like still water, reflective but unreadable. He wasn't looking at you. Until he was. For a heartbeat, you locked eyes. No smile, no frown, just a pause. Then he turned away. The horse stepped forward. The guards followed, and the moment was gone. You dropped your head, heart hammering, waiting for the shout, for the punishment, for someone to drag you from the line. But no one moved, no one spoke, no one saw, except him. You didn't know what it meant, whether he'd remember, whether you wanted him to. That night, you lay on your mat staring at the ceiling, but not counting cracks. You replayed the moment again and again, the exact angle of his gaze, the sound of hooves fading into the stone street, the stillness in your chest when he looked right through you. It didn't feel like being chosen or threatened. It felt like being seen, and somehow that was worse. Because now you knew even the Sultan, even the highest man in Egypt could look at you and forget. The first thing you noticed was the smell. It wasn't sweat. Not just that. You knew sweat, yours, theirs, soaked into every mat and sash and sleeve. This was sharper, thicker, metallic. Like lantern oil left too long in the sun, like leather scorched on a forge. It clung to your hands, to your throat, to the back of your mouth. You were told to report to the lower yard before dawn. No weapons, no armor, just stand, wait. The others were already there, 20 of you, some familiar, some not. No one spoke. The yard was lit by torches, though the sun had started to rise. The shadows flickered across the walls, long and trembling. Then the trainers arrived, 3 of them, silent, stern, dressed in black. One carried a list, another held a long wooden staff, the third just his hands. The man with the list began to call names. One by one, boys stepped forward. They were handed a piece of cloth, a belt, a blindfold. No explanation, no encouragement. You waited. Hands clenched, the oil-slick smell thickening with every breath. When your name was called, you didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. You stepped forward, took the cloth, wrapped it around your eyes with fingers that did not shake, at least not where they could see. The staff tapped once. You turned right, marched 10 steps, stopped. Someone behind you breathed too fast. Someone else whispered a prayer. A boy began to cough, harsh and wet. No one told him to stop. But when the staff passed near, he fell silent. They began the test. You didn't know the rules, just the rhythm, sound, silence, movement, impact. Sometimes it was a strike. Sometimes it was a question. Sometimes it was nothing, just the sound of footsteps circling. They were listening, watching, judging. You held still. When the blow came, you let it land. When the silence stretched, you filled it with steady breath. Time became strange. You didn't know if it had been 10 minutes or an hour. But eventually, the cloth was removed. Your eyes burned in the light. You squinted, saw the others, some bleeding, some already gone. No one clapped. No one announced results. You were told to return to your barracks. That night, 4 mats were empty. No explanations, no farewells, just gone. And the smell, it lingered. In your hair, in the folds of your tunic, in the dreams that followed. You tried to wash it off, scrubbed your hands raw, rinsed your mouth 3 times, but it stayed. Because it wasn't oil, not really, not entirely. It was fear, and it had seeped into the stone. You hadn't spoken to him before, not really. You'd seen him during drills, shorter than you, faster, with a scar across his cheek like a dried river. He kept to himself, didn't laugh, didn't limp, didn't flinch when others cursed. He was just there, like stonework, always where he was supposed to be, never more. That morning, breakfast was thin. 2 ladles of lentils and no bread. The boy ahead of you in line whispered something to the cook. The cook shrugged. You moved forward. You weren't surprised. Rations had been shrinking for days. They didn't explain. They never did. You sat down anyway, back against the wall bowl in your lap. Your stomach ached in the dull way you were used to. Not angry hungry, just empty. And then a shadow. You looked up. It was him. He didn't speak. He just stood over you, broke his bread in half, and held it out. No drama, no grand gesture, no looking around to see who was watching. You hesitated, not out of pride, out of confusion. Bread was currency here, a measure of strength, of favor, of survival. He was giving you half. You took it, nodded. He nodded back barely. Then he sat down across from you, facing the wall. You ate slowly, savoring every chew. Not because it tasted good, it didn't, but because it was the first thing that you hadn't earned through pain. You never learned his name. But you noticed him more after that. The way he tied his sandals tighter than anyone else. The way he wiped his blade after every drill, even when shaking. The way he always offered his bowl last, but ate first efficiently, never greedily. Some nights you'd catch him praying. Not with the others, not in the hall. Just crouched by the water barrel, lips moving in silence, eyes fixed on the ground. You never spoke to him again, not with words. But once during sparring, he caught your elbow before you hit the ground. Just for a second, then he let go. And another time when the storm soaked the barracks, he moved your mat away from the leak, didn't say a thing. And you let him, because sometimes mercy is quiet. And friendship, if that's what it was, doesn't need names. You never returned the bread. He never asked. But from that day forward, you split yours in half every morning, just in case someone else needed it. And sometimes you left the other half near his bowl, without looking, without speaking. Because kindness here had to be small, like a crumb, like a secret, like survival. It happened during footwork. The sun was high, dust thick. Your sandals were loose from the morning drills, but there hadn't been time to fix them. You were tired, not the kind that sleep solves, the kind that sits in your bones quiet and heavy and waits for you to drop. You misstepped, just once, left foot forward when it should have been back, a single beat off. Enough to break the line, enough to get noticed. You felt it before anyone spoke, the silence around you, that sharp breath from the boy behind, the sudden stillness of the trainer's boots on stone. You froze. The mistake echoed in your head, small but obvious. You knew the rules. Mistakes meant punishment. Public, swift and cold. The trainer walked towards you, slow, measured, not with anger, with authority. He stopped in front of you. Your eyes stayed down, your chest tightened. You braced for the strike, the barked command, the humiliation. But it didn't come. Instead, he looked at you, just looked. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. No nod, no warning, just silence. The drill resumed. You moved, precisely, too precisely. Every breath after that felt borrowed. You didn't understand. You hadn't earned leniency. You weren't special. So why? You watched him closely after that. Not with resentment, with wonder. He was never soft, never kind, but he saw more than most. He noticed which boys helped each other, which ones cut corners, which ones held their stances a second longer, even when no one was watching. He rarely spoke, but once, when another boy fell and scraped his hands raw, the trainer gave him a cloth without breaking stride. And another time when someone cheated during sparring, he didn't scold. He simply pulled the boy aside after dusk. No one ever knew what was said, but the boy never cheated again. You never spoke to the trainer, but from that day forward, you tried harder, not to be the best, not to impress. Just to be worthy of the moment, he looked away. Because, in this place where pain was the language and silence was a sentence, his mercy was a rare dialect. And you never forgot how it felt, not to be forgiven, but to be seen and spared. He wasn't supposed to fall behind. That's the rule. If you can't keep pace, you don't deserve the line. That morning, the run was longer than usual. 3 laps around the outer wall. Rough stone, uneven dust. No shoes, part of the test. You were halfway through the second lap when you heard the stumble. A breath caught. A sharp exhale, half pain, half panic. You didn't turn. You didn't need to. You knew who it was. The boy from the lower row. The one who never spoke unless spoken to. Quiet, steady, always behind you by 2 paces. He was limping now, dragging one foot slightly, but still trying to run. Still trying not to fall. The others passed him. No one stopped. You didn't either, not at first. But by the time you reached the last bend, he was behind by too much. He'd never make it back in time. You slowed, just enough to let him catch your shoulder. He didn't speak, just looked at you, a flash of fear, shame, and something close to apology. You grabbed his arm. Not gently, not dramatically, just enough to keep him upright. You looped it over your shoulder, shifted your weight, and kept moving. Each step hurt, not because of the weight, but because of what it meant. You were breaking pace, breaking form. And everyone could see. The gate grew closer. You didn't look at the trainer by the arch, didn't look at the others who had already finished. You focused on one thing, getting him there, whole. When you crossed the line, the boy's foot barely touched the ground, his breath ragged, yours tight. The trainer said nothing. He just made a mark on his board and pointed toward the courtyard. That afternoon, you were both assigned to latrine duty. Punishment? Expected. The boy tried to object, tried to say it was his fault. You stopped him, with a glance, a breath, a single shake of your head. You did the work together, knees deep in things that didn't belong in stories. But you didn't complain. Neither of you did. That night, your hands were blistered and your back was sore. But you slept. And he folded your blanket before morning call, said nothing, just nodded once. From then on, he kept his pace, always. But sometimes when the steps grew hard, you'd feel him just behind your shoulder. Not asking, not leaning, just there. Like a promise, like a shadow that would never slow you down again. It didn't happen during drills. Not during punishment, not even during battle training. It happened during breakfast. He was a new boy. You didn't know his name. Maybe he hadn't been given one yet, still thin, still pale, still walking like someone who hadn't accepted the dust in his lungs. That morning the stew was colder than usual, thin, lumpy. He held the bowl too tightly, hands trembling, lips pressed tight. No one spoke, no one ever did during meals. But then he dropped the bowl. It hit the ground with a soft splatter, not loud, not dramatic, just a thud followed by silence. Everyone paused. He stood there staring at the mess at his empty hands. And then something cracked. Not his voice, not his knees. His eyes. He didn't cry. Not at first. He laughed. A sharp, short sound. Once, then twice. Then he sat down. Right there in the spill, cross-legged knees in the soup, and he started muttering. At first, you couldn't understand. It wasn't Arabic, wasn't your language either. Just noise rising and falling like he was singing a broken lullaby to himself. The room didn't move. Trainers watched from the doorway, unblinking. One of them walked over, slow, not with urgency but with the certainty of someone who had done this before. He reached down not to strike, but to pull the boy up by his collar. The boy didn't fight, didn't speak, didn't resist. He just went limp, like a bag of rags. They took him out. No one followed. The stain stayed, for days. No one cleaned it. You stepped around it, always around. That evening, his mat was folded. His name, if he had one, scraped off the board. No questions, no prayers. But in the silence that followed, you felt something shift. In the boys beside you, in yourself. Because until that day, you believed everyone here could endure. That pain had a limit. That hunger could be silenced. That fear was a thread you could always pull tighter. But now, you knew. Some threads snap. And when they do, there's no sound louder than the bowl hitting stone. You found it under a blanket. Not yours. One of the older boys had gone missing the night before. No warning, no whisper, Just a folded mat and silence where his breath used to be. You weren't close. You never spoke. But you knew his rhythm, how he clicked his tongue during drills, how he rubbed his thumb over his wrist when nervous, how he never ate his olives. That morning you were told to clean the space. You lifted the mat, and there it was. A square of cloth-wrapped parchment, creased and frayed at the edges, folded tight. You looked around. No one was watching, or if they were, they didn't stop you. So you slipped it into your sash, carried it with you all day through drills, through prayer, through silence. That night, in the soft dark of the barracks, you opened it. The ink had faded in places, some letters smudged, but most were still sharp. You didn't recognize the script. Not Arabic, not your mother's tongue. Something older, or just different. You stared at the shapes, curved and slanted. Some looked like birds, others like scars. You ran your fingers over them as if touch could unlock meaning. Nothing came. But you kept reading, not for understanding, for rhythm. You read it aloud softly, so only your breath could hear. It felt like prayer, like memory trying to come home. The other boys were asleep. Some snored. One whispered in a dream. But you sat there, legs crossed, letter in lap, reading a ghost's voice in a language no longer alive. You didn't know who the letter was for, or if it had ever been sent. Maybe it was meant to be burned, or buried, or forgotten. But it wasn't. It had waited. For someone, for you. You folded it again, carefully, along the same worn creases. You wrapped it in cloth, tucked it into the lining of your blanket, not to hide it, to keep it safe. You didn't read it again, not for weeks. But some nights, when the world felt too sharp, when your name felt too distant, you'd reach under the blanket just to feel the edges. The letter meant nothing. But it also meant everything, because even if you couldn't read it, you understood what it was trying to say. I was here, I hoped, I feared, and I left something behind. Now, you were the only one who knew, and that somehow felt sacred. You didn't remember falling asleep. You only remembered the fever. It started in your spine, a slow burning ache that curled up into your neck, then bloomed behind your eyes. You tried to train through it, tried to eat, tried to speak when spoken to. But by evening, the world had blurred. Voices turned to fog, steps turned to waves. You collapsed on your mat before the call to prayer. No one helped. No one needed to. This was normal. Boys got sick. They either got better or disappeared. Your breath was shallow. Your lips cracked. The mat beneath you itched like straw soaked in fire. The blanket was too heavy. The air too thin. You drifted. Woke, drifted again. At some point, night came. The room dimmed. The others whispered, then fell into the rhythm of sleep, sighs, coughs, murmurs. And you lay still, staring at the rafters that swam in and out of focus. You thought of home, not clearly, just flashes of red thread, a clay bowl, the sound of goats behind a wall. Then came the sound of footsteps, soft, bare. Someone moved through the dark. Not a trainer, no boots, no barked commands. Just quiet presence. You didn't open your eyes. But you felt it, the flicker of light. A spark, a breath, the warm glow of something small and real. A candle, placed gently on the stone beside your head. It wasn't close enough to burn, but close enough to soften the dark. You turned slightly, barely. And there he was, the boy who had once shared his bread. He didn't speak, didn't smile, just adjusted the candle so the wax wouldn't run toward your sleeve. Then stood, walked back to his mat, laid down, as if nothing had happened, but it had. Because that light stayed, through the night, even when your fever rose again, even when you shook and sweated and drifted into dreamless sleep, it stayed. In the morning, the candle was gone, melted flat, a circle of wax the size of your palm. He never mentioned it. You never thanked him. Because here, mercy wasn't loud. Kindness wasn't public. It came in flickers, in breaths, in silence. And some nights, when you lie in bed and the world feels too wide, you still remember that flame. How it danced for no one but you. How it held the dark back just a little. And how somehow that was enough. No one sings here. Not the trainers, not the boys, not even the wind through the barracks. Voices are for commands, for prayers, for apologies. Not for music, but still, some nights, when the moon is a sliver and the others have fallen into sleep too heavy to dream, you hum, soft, low, like a breath that's trying not to be noticed. You don't know when it started, or why. Maybe it was after the fever. Maybe it came from a memory too faint to name. It's not a song you were taught, not really, but the tune lives in your bones, in the shape your tongue curls when no one's listening, in the way your fingertips tap the same rhythm on your knee. You don't remember the words, just the melody. It rises like steam from hot bread, sinks like the sun behind your old home's hill, stays like smoke in wool. You hum it while cleaning your blade, while sweeping the stone floors, while staring at the wall where someone else once scratched their days. It doesn't sound beautiful, not here, not under these ceilings, not with your voice this tired. But it's yours, and it reminds you just for a moment that you were once something softer. A boy who chased goats, a boy who danced in dust, a boy who believed the world might sing back. No one hears you, or if they do, they pretend not to. Because they understand. Every boy here carries a song he isn't allowed to sing. Yours just happens to survive. Sometimes when the others shift in sleep, you stop, hold your breath, wait, then begin again. Because the song is not for them, it's for you, to mark the hours, to name the pain, to stretch across the cracks they tried to carve in you. And when your voice fades, when your throat goes dry, you hold the tune in your chest, a heartbeat that no one can confiscate, not even the Sultan. Because they can shave your head, rename you, dress you, train you, but they cannot unmake your song. Not as long as you remember how it goes. You woke before the call. That wasn't unusual. The body learns the rhythm here, when to breathe, when to rise, when to brace. But this morning, it wasn't your own breath that stirred you. It was the stillness beside you. The boy who usually shifted in his sleep, the one who muttered in his native tongue, the one who always folded his blanket into a perfect square, he wasn't there. His mat was empty. At first, you told yourself he had gone early, to the latrines, to morning duty, to the chapel, but his shoes were still beneath the bedroll, his belt still hanging from the hook, his cup untouched by the basin. Just gone. You stared at the mat, the slight depression where his body used to settle, the faint warmth that hadn't yet cooled. No blood, no noise, no explanation. The others noticed, but no one asked. Because here, questions are heavier than silence. The trainer came in, eyes sharp, voice measured. Line up. You stood, heart tight, neck stiff. No one mentioned the absence. It was as if the boy had never existed. His name wasn't called, his mat wasn't reassigned, just folded neatly by evening. That day the drills were harder, longer, quieter. No one laughed, no one broke form. Even the wind felt more precise. That night, you waited. You waited for him to return. For a whisper, a knock, the sound of feet shuffling through the dark. But nothing came. Only dreams, not of him, but of the space he left behind. You remembered how he always adjusted the lamp so it didn't flicker too much, how he tied his sash with a double knot, how he once gave you the second half of his bread without looking you in the eye. You never said thank you. There hadn't been time. So the next morning, before drills, you left a stone on his mat. Small, smooth, rounded by river water, one you had kept in your pocket since your first week. No one saw, or maybe they did, but no one moved it. And somehow, that made it real. You didn't know where he had gone, if he had failed, if he had been removed, if he had run. But you knew what it meant. Absence here is its own kind of death, a slow erasure, clean, unspoken. And yet you remembered. Not loudly, not in song, but in the space beside you, still empty, still sacred. You were never good with cloth. Your fingers moved too stiffly. The folds never sat right. The knot was always too loose or too tight, and the tail, the part that should hang just so, somehow always twisted the wrong way. Every morning you'd try. You'd watch the others wrap the linen around their heads with practiced grace, one loop over the ear, one fold down the nape, a twist, a tuck, a pull. Yours always looked crooked. Some of the boys laughed. One even offered to fix it once quickly, mockingly. You refused. Better wrong alone than right by ridicule. That day, the sun was brutal, white and sharp. Drills were called early, and you were still fumbling with your turban. It had slipped again during warm-ups, hung low over your left eye. You kept your stance, kept your mouth shut, but your vision was off. When the officer walked by, you expected a slap, or worse, a command to remove it entirely. Instead, he paused, just for a moment. He said nothing, then reached out. 2 fingers gloved in leather touched the edge of the cloth. You froze. The courtyard kept moving. Dust rose. Commands rang out. But in that second, the world narrowed to one hand and one gesture. He didn't scold, didn't ask. He simply lifted the fold, smoothed it across your brow, tucked it behind your ear, and pulled the tail tight so it sat snug at your neck. Then he stepped back, looked at his work, gave the smallest of nods, and moved on. You didn't move for a breath, then 2. Your heart thudded like it did during sparring, but not from fear. From something else. Recognition, maybe, not of rank or skill, but of care. The others saw. No one spoke. Later, someone asked what you did to deserve it. You shrugged. There was no answer, because sometimes, in a place like this, the greatest kindness isn't a word. It isn't food. It isn't even mercy. It's being seen not as a number or a soldier or a mistake, but as a boy struggling with cloth. That night you practiced, twisting, folding, tucking, and in the dark your fingers moved more easily. Not perfectly, but better, as if memory had soaked into the linen, as if that one moment had taught you something deeper than drills ever could. How to carry yourself, how to wear who you are with quiet pride. He was new. You could tell by the way he walked, too stiff, too careful, like each step was asking permission. His sandals were tied wrong, his sash too tight, his eyes wide and blinking too much, still searched the walls like they might open and let him out. He was assigned to the mat beside yours, didn't speak the first 2 days, didn't make eye contact, didn't eat all his bread. Just watched, listened, learned. You remembered that silence. You had worn it once. On the 3rd morning during weapons drills, he dropped his blade. A clean fall straight to the ground. No stumble, no noise. But the trainer saw. He froze, then reached for the weapon with trembling fingers. But you were faster. You picked it up, held it out, met his eyes for just a breath. He nodded, took it, returned to line. Nothing more. That night, just before lights out, he whispered. Brother, you weren't sure you heard it right. It was soft, nearly swallowed by the snore of someone nearby. But it was there. One word, in Arabic. Clumsy quiet, but clear. You turned. He didn't look at you, just kept folding his blanket. Like he hadn't said anything at all, but you heard it. And it landed somewhere deeper than bone. Because no one had called you that in this place. Not trainer, not equal, not friend, but brother. A word with weight. A word that meant I see you. I trust you. I want to believe we're not alone. You didn't answer, not with words. You didn't need to, but the next morning you helped him adjust his grip before drills, tapped his elbow during sparring, passed him your water before he asked. He never said it again, didn't need to. It was already there in the way he stood just behind you in line, in the way he copied your footwork, in the way he leaned slightly closer when the winds howled too cold at night. And later, when he grew taller, when his strikes found rhythm, when he no longer flinched at orders, he did the same for someone else. Helped them fold a blanket, passed them a crust of bread, called them brother in the quiet. And you smiled, not outwardly, just inside. Because here, where names are taken and silence is safer than speech, one word can still build a bridge. And sometimes that's all a soul needs to keep from falling. They didn't call it a punishment. They called it selection. You were woken in the dark. No words, just a hand on your shoulder, a nod toward the door, and the cold bite of air outside the barracks. 12 of you were taken. No weapons, no food, just a flask of water and your bare hands. You walked through the lower gate, past the walls into the stone clearing, the one used only for tests that weren't explained in advance. There were no commands, no instructions, just a single sentence from the officer. You'll remain here until told otherwise. That was all. Then he left. The gate shut behind him. At first, you waited. Some sat, some stood with arms crossed. One boy laughed too loud too quickly. The first hour passed. The sun rose, then climbed, then glared. By midday, the stone beneath your feet was burning. You shifted, not to rest, just to keep your soles from blistering too fast. Still, no one spoke. Because speaking meant spending energy, and you didn't know how long this would last. Someone fainted by the third hour. He was carried away, quietly. No one reacted. Another left on his own, whispered something about his lungs. No one stopped him, but the rest of you remained. Your lips dried, your knees ached. You began to count the shadows, not by shape, but by movement. By the 7th hour, your breath came slow, measured. You'd stopped thinking about time, stopped blinking so often. Just stood, waited. A test, but for what? Strength, obedience, faith. You didn't know. You didn't care. You just refused to fall. By nightfall, 5 boys remained. The moon hung low. The air turned cold sharp where the sweat had dried on your back. You heard one boy sob, not loud, just once. Then he sat. Another stood with eyes closed, whispering to someone not there. And then a bell, soft, distant, like a breath through bronze. The gate creaked, a torch flickered. The officer returned. He looked at you, all that remained, 3 of you. His face was unreadable. He pointed, not to you, to the boy beside you. Leave. The boy blinked, confused, but obeyed. Then to the other, stay. Then to you, stay. And that was it. You had passed. Though no one told you what you'd passed, or what it meant, you returned to the barracks on shaking legs. No applause, no words. But that night, when you reached for your water, you found a second flask beside it. Full, fresh, unmarked. You never asked who left it. You didn't need to, because in this place, survival was the quietest kind of language. And endurance was not about glory, but about stillness, about how long you could stand when everything inside you begged to sit. They told you it was maintenance duty. Clean the weapons, they said. Simple, unremarkable. You were relieved. After days of running sparring silence, the idea of scrubbing metal felt almost like mercy. You were wrong. The forge was deeper than you'd ever been, a sunken chamber beneath the armory where air barely moved and walls sweated from the inside. The moment you stepped in, the heat hit your lungs, thick, oily, unforgiving. Your tunic clung to your back, your eyes watered, and the forge master, a man who spoke with his eyes more than his mouth, handed you a cloth, a bowl of brine, and a rusted sword, until it gleams. The brine burned. You dipped the cloth, wrung it out, and began. Salt and steel, fire and breath. The blade was cold at first, then warm, then nearly hot. You scraped, rubbed, pressed harder. The cloth tore. Your fingers slipped. You used your sleeve. Time blurred. The heat made thought difficult. The sword felt heavier with every stroke. No one spoke. Other boys stood beside you, bent over hilts, faces slick with sweat and soot. Every so often, the forge master passed behind you, tapping a blade with his knuckle. If it didn't ring clean, he added time. No complaint allowed, no rest offered. The salt got into your cuts. Tiny scrapes from training, now screaming, bubbling with pain. You didn't stop. You couldn't. Because stopping meant failure. And failure here meant you didn't come back up the stairs. At one point your hand cramped, curled in on itself. You bit the inside of your cheek until it bled just to stay standing. You pressed on. The sword was no longer a tool. It was a test, a mirror, a weight that asked, how much of yourself will you give just to finish this? By the time the blade shone, you couldn't feel your palms. The cloth was shredded. Your breath tasted like metal. The forge master took the sword, held it to the light, nodded once. Then handed you another. You wanted to scream, but instead you reached for it. And began again. You cleaned 5 blades that day. You don't remember finishing the last one. Just darkness, a cool basin and the sting of salt water being poured over your hands. Later that night, as you lay on your mat, you stared at your fingers, red, raw, trembling. You thought about fire, about pain, about salt, about how something so small, so invisible, could enter your blood and remind you you are still alive. It was after morning roll call. The air was still cool. The dust hadn't risen yet, and everything felt quiet in that heavy, waiting way. The trainer stood before the line, face blank, hands behind his back. Then he called a name. The boy stepped forward, thin, older than you, but not by much. He looked calm, too calm, but his jaw twitched just once. You broke formation, the trainer said. You slowed the line. No one spoke. The boy didn't deny it, didn't explain, just stood straight eyes ahead. Then the trainer turned and pointed at you. Step forward, he said. You, deliver 10. You blinked, not because you didn't understand, but because you did. 10 strikes, to his back, with the training stick. A punishment meant to hurt, but not break. Meant to teach, but not yours to give. You stepped forward, hands cold, chest tight. The boy looked at you now, not with fear, not with hate, just with acceptance. As if he knew this would happen, as if he had already forgiven you. The trainer handed you the stick. It was light, too light. You wished it had more weight so you could blame it on momentum. You took your position behind him, raised the stick, waited. 1 breath, 2, then struck. The sound echoed, not loud, but sharp like a twig snapping underfoot. He flinched, just slightly. You struck again, and again. Each time your grip tightened. Not because of anger, but because your hands wanted to let go. By the 6th blow, your arms felt weak. By the 9th, your jaw hurt from clenching. And after the 10th, you stepped back, returned the stick. The trainer nodded, dismissed you both. The boy walked back to the line, sat, said nothing. That night, he was quiet, didn't eat, didn't sleep. You lay beside him, stared at the ceiling, the cracks. You didn't speak either, but before dawn he reached out, just once. Touched your shoulder, softly, no pressure, then turned away. And somehow, that gesture weighed more than the blows, because it wasn't a thank you, wasn't blame. It was acknowledgement of what had happened, of what had to happen, of what still hurt. And when you trained together the next day, he didn't hesitate. He passed you the blade without flinching, trusted you to catch it, to return it, to never miss. Because here, pain is routine. But respect is a choice. And sometimes the deepest kind is given in silence. You woke just before dawn. The air was cooler than usual, a stillness in the barracks that felt almost holy. You moved slowly, like always, stretching one leg, then the other, listening for the quiet crack of knees and shoulders. The others still slept. You reached for your boots. Same pair as always, worn stiff at the heel, with a small cut near the toe from last week's footwork. Your hand slipped into one, then stopped. Something was wrong. Not pain. Not yet. Just resistance, a texture, a weight that hadn't been there the night before. You froze. Then turned the boot, slowly tilted it toward the dim gray light of morning. And there it was. Coiled in the toe, still, patient, black as ash with a tail curved like a hook from God's own hand. A scorpion. Not large, but deadly. Its claws moved just barely, like a dream beginning to wake. You didn't shout, didn't drop the boot. You breathed in, held, then out. Quiet, deliberate. You turned the boot upside down, gently, tapped it against the stone floor. Once, twice. On the third tap, it slid out, landed like liquid, coiled again, ready. You stepped back, eyes locked. It didn't charge, didn't flee. It just stayed there, tail high, calm in its power. And you realized something. It had been in there all night, right beneath you, as you slept, as you dreamed, as your breath passed inches from its waiting sting. You could have died in your sleep, without knowing, without warning. But you didn't. It spared you, or ignored you, or waited too long. And now, you had a choice. You found a piece of cloth, wrapped your hand, picked up a flat training blade. Then, one swift movement. You ended it. The body curled in on itself, twitched once, then stilled. You didn't celebrate, didn't speak. You scooped the creature into your empty water bowl, carried it to the courtyard, buried it beneath the practice tree. No one saw, or if they did, they pretended not to. That day you moved differently, not faster, not harder, just quieter. Because something had shifted, not just in your boot, in you, a knowledge, a nearness. That death doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits in soft leather, just beneath your heel. They woke you with a torch. Not a word. Just the flare of light against stone, the signal, hand to shoulder, then a nod to the door. You weren't the only one. 8 others rose from their mats, silent, still rubbing sleep from their eyes, already knowing not to ask. It wasn't punishment, at least not officially. It was instruction, discipline, but you knew better. It was a test. They took you to the oldest tower, the one no one trained in, the one that loomed behind the west wall like a broken tooth, always in the corner of your vision. The stone stairs waited, worn thin by years of footsteps, wider at the base, tighter near the top. You were told to climb. No explanation, no time limit, no reason. Just climb. The first few steps were easy, stone beneath your soles, cool air, muscle memory from drills. But the spiral narrowed quickly, light faded, air thickened with dust and bat droppings. Soon, all you heard were footsteps, soft echoing uneven. Breath became a rhythm, one step, inhale, next step, exhale. No one spoke, no one dared. Because in that place, speech felt wrong, like it would wake something sleeping in the stone. The higher you went, the steeper the stairs, the tighter the turns. Your legs burned, your palms grazed the wall for balance. Someone slipped behind you, a muffled grunt, the scrape of skin on stone. But no one stopped. You couldn't. To stop was to fail. To fail was to vanish. You kept climbing. The tower never seemed to end, just coil upward forever like a test of faith carved in circles. Your breath grew ragged, sweat dripped into your eyes. You bit your lip to stay quiet. The copper taste grounded you. At some point your body stopped counting. You became movement, a set of legs, a pair of lungs, nothing more. Then, suddenly light. A slit in the wall, narrow, sharp as a blade. You passed it, and then another, the top. You stepped out onto the platform. Sky above, black and endless, stars like pinpricks through silk. You weren't alone. 3 others had made it, silent, bent with exhaustion. You didn't speak to them, but for a moment, you all stood in that wind sharing something no one could name. Below the fortress slept, trainers, barracks gates, all small now. Powerless. For the first time since arriving, you felt higher than the place that held you. Not freer, not safe, but higher. You didn't stay long. The officer who had led you there gave no orders. He just looked at you each in turn, then pointed back to the stair. The descent was worse. Your knees shook, your vision blurred, but your silence held. When you reached the bottom, the others were gone, taken elsewhere, or sent back. You walked to your mat, collapsed. Slept like stone, and in your dream, you were still climbing, always climbing. Not toward escape, but toward proof that there was a part of you that would not turn back, no matter how narrow the steps became. You could see your breath. That morning, the air bit harder than usual, sharp as a blade, quiet as a thief. Even the walls had gone still. No creaks, no murmurs, just frost along the stone, clinging like a warning. You swung your legs off the mat. The floor was colder than bone, your soles curled from instinct. But you stood anyway. The bowl waited by the wall. Same place, same shape, but different. A thin sheet of ice had formed across the top, not thick, just a film. Clear, delicate, like the breath of a ghost caught in midair. You stared at it for a moment, your face still warm from sleep, your hands tucked under your arms. You could have skipped it. No one was watching. No officer stood with a whip. No other boy stirred yet. You could have walked past, gone to roll call with dry skin, with comfort still clinging to your cheeks. But you didn't. You reached down, touched the surface. It cracked, not loud but final, a sound like a whisper breaking. You dipped your hands in. The water clawed up your arms, 1,000 needles in your veins. Your breath seized, your back tensed. But you didn't stop. You cupped the water, lifted it, pressed it to your face. It stole your breath again. The cold tunneled into your skull, behind your eyes, into your spine. Tears sprang uninvited, but not from sadness. From shock, from contact. You rubbed the water into your skin, over the scar at your jawline, under your chin, behind your ears. A ritual now, not of hygiene, but of defiance. Because the ice could not stay, not where your heat insisted on being. You set the bowl down. Your hands throbbed red, your face burned in the cold. And still you felt cleaner. Not cleaner like soap, cleaner like stone after rain, like something harsh had scrubbed you and left you bare, but standing. Later that morning, a younger boy hesitated at his own bowl. You passed him, didn't speak, but you saw his eyes flick to your dripping hands. He stared for a moment, then broke his own ice, just like you had. That was the lesson. Discipline wasn't what others imposed. It was what you chose when no one else would know. And in that moment, you weren't just washing away sleep. You were proving to the cold, to the stone, to the boy in the cracked reflection that you would meet the day head on, even if it tried to freeze you out. It happened during robe folding. Not a dramatic moment, not a ceremony, just an ordinary part of daily life, the kind of task your hands could do without thinking. Fold once across, fold again lengthwise, tuck the hem, align the corner. A ritual of sameness, of obedience. You stood in rows, all boys, all quiet. Then someone dropped theirs. It fluttered awkwardly to the ground like a bird with no wings, landed in a pile of itself. The boy who dropped it, small, pale, newer than most, looked stunned. And then he laughed, just once. But it rang. It cracked through the silence like a chisel to stone. Not a snort, not a cough. A laugh. Short, clear, honest. And in that single sound was everything this place tried to squeeze out of you: relief, surprise, the absurdity of caring so much about a fold in fabric. The room froze. Hands paused mid-crease. Eyes darted, not at him, but at the trainer by the archway. The man didn't move, didn't blink. He just stepped forward. One step, two, boots whispering over stone. The boy's smile faltered, his mouth still shaped like joy, but his eyes already pleading for it to vanish. Too late. The trainer didn't shout, didn't strike. He just took the robe, folded it slowly, perfectly, then placed it back in the boy's arms. Then whispered, "Do it again, all of you." The command echoed. You looked at your robe. It was already folded. You unfolded it, began again. No one complained, no one dared. And the boy who laughed, he didn't make another sound for days. But something strange happened that night. In the dim of the barracks, beneath the rustle of blankets and coughs, you caught yourself smiling. Not because it was funny, but because it had happened. A laugh, real, unplanned, like lightning under a clear sky. And in this place where silence was armor and obedience the only music, a laugh was rebellion. Small, human. You never thanked him. No one did. But from that day on, you folded your robe with just a little less fear. And some nights, when the moonlight made strange shapes on the wall, you remembered the sound of it, brief, bright, and too alive to last. It was during sparring. Not your first match, not your hardest, but something was different. The courtyard was crowded, dust thick in the air, sweat already drying on your neck. You faced a boy taller than you, not stronger but faster. He moved like the wind before a stormlight, then sudden. You circled each other, wooden blades raised, no real danger, not sharp enough to kill. But still, pain was pain, bruises still bloomed. You kept your stance tight, elbows close, breath steady. The first strike came high. You blocked it. The second came low. You stepped back. Then came the third, a diagonal sweep meant to test your instinct. You saw it, too late to dodge, too late to counter. It came for your face, fast, direct, inevitable. And you didn't flinch, not even a blink. The blade hissed through the air, close enough to stir your hair, close enough to feel the wind of it on your cheek, but you held still. Not frozen, not paralyzed, just steady. And in that breathless second you felt it. A shift. Not in the blade, in yourself, because once that motion would have made you flinch. Once your eyes would have squeezed shut. Your shoulders would have tensed, your breath would have caught. But not this time. This time, you let it pass. You trusted your feet, trusted the angle, trusted the pain, if it came, would not unmake you. The blade missed, barely. And the trainer saw. You heard his boots behind you pause. No words, no praise. But his silence felt different. After the match, your opponent nodded at you. You nodded back. That night, lying on your mat, you kept replaying that moment. Not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. Because fear didn't win, not this time. It didn't crawl up your spine, didn't tighten your grip, didn't close your eyes for you. It was still there but quiet, caged, held, and you understood something. Courage isn't about killing fear. It's about letting it live and walking forward anyway. It came in the middle of drills. You were in the upper yard, feet shifting through dust arms, sore from the last round of forms. The sun was cruel, the air still. Everything moved in patterns you could do with your eyes closed. Then the wind changed. You didn't notice it at first, just a brush across the back of your neck, cooler, wider. Then a scent. Not strong, not sharp, but unmistakable. Salt, and something else like wood soaked in heat, like clay walls after rain, like the breath of water just before it touches land. You froze. The trainer barked. You didn't hear him, because suddenly you weren't in the yard. You were home, or at least your body thought it was. The village path after a storm. The woven mat beside the cooking pit. Your mother's shawl hung in the sun. It was all there, in one inhale. And just like that, the world inside you cracked. Not broke, not shattered. Just cracked, enough to let something in, or something out. The others kept moving, striking, stepping, breathing in time. You stood still, eyes forward, but your heart was not here. It was standing barefoot beside a stream. It was tasting fruit from a stolen basket. It was laughing. You didn't cry, not then. There was no room for that, but your throat burned. The wind passed quickly, gone in minutes, replaced by the usual stillness, the dust, the smell of sweat and metal. But something inside you had shifted. For the rest of the day, your balance was off, not your body, your rhythm. As if the wind had brushed away the shell you built, and now everything beneath was exposed. That night, you climbed the wall. Not far, just enough to feel the air, and you waited. For the breeze to return, for the scent of home, for a moment of softness in a place made of stone. It didn't come. But you stayed there anyway, because sometimes even one breath is enough to remember who you were before the silence began. It was quiet, too quiet. Even the dogs had stopped barking. Even the wind held its breath. The moon was full silver light pouring through the cracks in the shuttered windows, painting everything in ghost. You were awake, not from pain, not from noise. Just awake. Eyes wide, heartbeat steady, body still too still. And in that stillness the thought came. Run. Not a voice, not a command. Just a pulse beneath your skin. Run. Your mind tried to push it away, but your legs had already swung off the mat. Your hands had already tightened around your sash. You looked at the door. Wood old and warped at the bottom. No lock from inside. The night watch would be light. You'd memorized the patterns weeks ago. 2 guards by the gate, one at the east tower half asleep. You had counted the steps, marked the shadows, listened to the squeak in the gate hinge that never got oiled. You knew the way, and still you sat there. You watched your own hand reach toward your sandals, watched your breath come short and shallow, watched your shadow tremble on the floor. Run. What stopped you? Not fear. You had feared worse, not pity. There was none left. It was something else. Something quieter. Responsibility. No, guilt. Maybe, but not for the guards, not for the trainers. For the boys, the one who once shared his bread, the one who lit the candle, the one who called you brother, the one whose place you had taken in drills when his arms could no longer lift the blade. They would be questioned, blamed, punished, for not seeing, for not knowing, for not stopping you. You exhaled, stood, walked to the door. Placed your palm flat against it. The wood was cold, rough, real. You stayed there a long time, not thinking, just feeling. And when the sky began to pale, just a hint of gray above the roofline, you stepped back. Not out, just back. You untied your sash, removed your sandals, laid down. The mat was rough, your blanket too thin. But it held you, and you slept. When morning came, no one knew, but you did. And that night, the night you almost ran, was the night you chose to stay. Not because you loved this place, not because you believed in it, but because for better or worse, it had shaped you, and you weren't finished becoming who you were meant to be. It was heavier than you expected, not just in weight and silence. The trainer didn't say much. He never did. He simply opened the case, lifted the blade by its black-wrapped hilt, and held it out to you. You didn't move at first. You had touched steel before, polished it, sharpened it, seen others train with it. But this time, He said nothing about training, only, "You're ready." Your fingers curled around the hilt. The leather felt rough, used, oiled by other hands, other palms that once trembled like yours now did. You lifted it slowly. Not like in drills, not for show, just to feel the gravity of it. It pulled differently than wood, more honest, more final. You tested the balance, two forward, a slight curve, meant to cut deep, not fast. The others watched from the edges of the yard, not jealous, not proud, just watching. They knew what it meant. Once the real blade touched your hand, you couldn't go back, couldn't claim ignorance, couldn't say I didn't know what it could do. The trainer gave no instructions, only nodded toward the post in the center of the courtyard. You approached it, a wooden column wrapped in cloth, marked by years of strikes. But this time, your strike would leave more than dents. You raised the sword, breathed once, twice, then swung. It bit deep, effortless, clean. The cloth split, the wood cracked, and your arm shuddered from the shock. Not pain, not recoil. Just understanding. This was not a symbol. It was not a decoration. It was not a tool. It was a line, drawn in metal. You wiped the blade, not because it was dirty, because it felt right. The trainer took it back, inspected the edge, then with a gesture handed it to you again. Keep it, that was all. That night you didn't sleep. You lay on your mat, the sword beside you, wrapped in cloth, but still whispering. Not words, not threats, just presence. Like a sleeping animal, coiled, waiting, and you thought this thing can take life. And then, so can I. Not because you wanted to, not because you had to, but because you had been made to, and now, you were someone they trusted to hold death in their name. You didn't know if that was an honor or a burden, but it was real. Heavier than the blade, sharper than the edge. And yours. The command came at dusk, not shouted, not written, just spoken quietly, directly, as the trainer passed by. You, with me, you followed. No one asked where, no one needed to. If someone was called after drills, it meant one of two things, a punishment or a task. Tonight, it was both. You reached the outer gate. 2 guards waited. Their swords were real. So was the tension in the air. You were handed a sealed letter, and one sentence. Deliver this. If anyone tries to stop you, end it. No instruction, no escort. Just steel in your hand and duty in your chest. You nodded, not out of courage, out of training. The path was familiar. Out through the eastern dunes, along the narrow trail that led to the supply camp. You had walked it, once before barefoot, as punishment, when you were still too young to carry a blade. Now the sand crunched beneath your sandals. The sword was heavy at your hip, the letter tucked into your sash. Midway through the second ridge, a figure stepped from the shadows. Not a soldier, not a trainer, just a man, older, eyes worn from sun and sorrow. He didn't draw a weapon, just held up a hand. Where are you headed, boy? His voice was calm, too calm. You didn't answer. You kept walking. He stepped closer. Orders don't matter out here. Still, you said nothing. When he reached for your arm, just lightly, just enough to slow you. You drew. No warning, no threat, just instinct. The blade moved, the way it had been trained to. Clean, fast, final. He dropped. No cry, no drama, just dust and silence. You stared at him. At what your hands had done. Your breath came fast, not from effort, from awareness. You had not hesitated, not for a second. And that terrified you more than anything else. You wiped the blade. Not because it was dirty, because it was necessary. The letter remained dry, untouched. You delivered it. No one asked questions. When you returned, they nodded once, nothing more. You lay on your mat that night, Eyes open, hands still tingling. You waited for guilt. For nightmares, for a voice to say, "You've gone too far," but it didn't come. Only stillness, and the knowledge that something inside you had changed. Not broken, not dead, changed. Because when the moment came, the real one, the one no drill could prepare for, you didn't flinch, you didn't stutter, you didn't wait. And in that silence, you understood. Sometimes the only way to survive is to move faster than your mercy. It wasn't a formal meeting. No scroll, no wax seal, no audience. Just a knock on the side, post of your barracks, softer than wind against linen. You stepped out. The yard was empty. Moonlight stretched long shadows across the stone. He was waiting. Not a trainer. Higher. You'd seen him once or twice, a quiet officer with eyes too old for his age. He gestured. You followed. Down the southern path, past the gate that no recruits used, past the cisterns, past the broken wall no one had repaired. You didn't speak, not from fear, but because some silences demand respect. He stopped near a low bench, sat, and motioned for you to do the same. You did. The night was warm, but his voice was cold. You've seen how this place works, he said. Not a question, a statement. You nodded. You followed every order. Another truth. He turned to look at you. How many boys have vanished since you arrived? You hesitated. Too many. That was all you could say. He didn't nod, didn't smile, just looked forward again. Some couldn't keep up, some broke, some were removed for reasons that won't be written. You didn't respond. Because this was not a conversation, it was a weighing. He reached into his robe, pulled out a folded piece of parchment. Unsealed, plain. He held it toward you, but didn't let go. If I give this to you, you'll carry more than words. You met his eyes. No fear there, just fire. You'll carry decisions, you'll carry names, and once you carry that, his fingers loosened. You can't pretend you're just a sword anymore. You took the parchment. He stood. Burn it after reading. Tell no one. If you hesitate, don't come back. And then he walked away. You sat there for a long time. The letter felt heavier than steel. You didn't open it right away. You watched the moon, listened to the sounds of the fortress breathing in sleep. Only then, when everything felt still enough, you read. Names, times, a route, a plan. Not strategy. Something else. A transfer, or maybe a purge. And in the middle of it, one name you recognized. Not your own, but someone whose mat was still beside yours. Someone who once held your arm when you stumbled. Someone who once called you brother. You folded the parchment, lit the oil lamp, held it above the flame. It curled, blackened, vanished. And in the smoke, you felt the shift. You were no longer just a student, no longer just a survivor. You were trusted, and in this world, trust was just another kind of burden. But it was yours now. The room was dark. Not fully, just enough that you couldn't see the walls. Only faces lit by a single hanging lamp, flickering like a breath trapped in oil. There were 5 of you. You stood in a line, shoulders square, spine straight. An officer, not one you knew, stepped forward. He didn't look at you when he spoke. One of you is not going forward. No explanation, no reason. Just that. You waited for the name. You waited for a signal. But then he turned to you, only you, and said, "You decide." The words didn't land at first. They hovered, hung in the air like a smoke that wouldn't clear. You've seen them all. You've trained beside them. You know their limits. One of them will compromise the mission. Choose. No one else reacted. The boys beside you still, stone-faced, as if they too had expected this. You looked to the left. One had a scar along his jaw. He once gave you a knife when yours broke. He had never asked for it back. The second fast, hand slow heart, trusted by many, but once he hesitated when it counted. The third, smaller, younger, but sharper than anyone else. He had warned you before a failed ambush, saved your life with 3 words. The fourth, your friend. The one who lit the candle. The one who folded your blanket when you were sick. The one whose name you would still remember if you forgot your own. Choose. Your hands trembled, not from fear, from weight. Because this wasn't a sword, wasn't a letter, wasn't a command to deliver or a wall to climb. This was judgment, and it had been handed to you. You could lie, you could stall, but they would know. And if you refused, you all would fail. You opened your mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then you spoke one name. The room didn't shift. No one gasped. No one wept. The chosen boy didn't plead. He stepped forward, nodded once, turned, and walked away. You stood there, still, breathing, but something inside you had cracked. Not broken, just split. Later, the officer placed a hand on your shoulder. You did what was needed. You didn't answer, because even when something is necessary, that doesn't make it easy, or right, or forgettable. That night, the barracks was colder, not in temperature and memory. No one asked you why. No one treated you differently, but you noticed the space. Where one mat had been, where one voice no longer murmured in sleep, and you realized. Sometimes survival demands blood, but sometimes it only demands choice. And that can bleed deeper. It didn't happen in ceremony. There were no banners, no trumpets, no scrolls. It happened in mud. You were waist deep in it, sand soaked with rain and old blood. The river had risen faster than expected, and the trail had vanished. 12 boys, 1 crate, 1 narrow window to cross to the next outpost. No trainers, no officers, just you. You hadn't been appointed, you hadn't been told, but when the rains came and the others looked around, they looked at you. Not for orders at first, just for steadiness. And you gave it, not by shouting, not by acting like someone bigger than you were. You simply said, "This way, we use the ridge." One voice disagreed, another hesitated. You didn't argue, you moved. And they followed, because trust by then wasn't something handed down. It was built day after day, step after step, in bruises and bread and broken silences. You reached the far bank. You lost 1 boot. 2 boys nearly slipped. But you made it. Wet, exhausted, alive. You dropped the crate with a grunt, collapsed to your knees, laughed dry and short. And that's when he said it. The boy with the quick eyes, the one who used to mumble prayers in his sleep. He clapped a hand on your shoulder. "Nice work, Commander." It wasn't a joke. His voice didn't hold sarcasm, only breathless relief. The others heard. No one corrected him. The word stuck, not because it was official, but because it felt earned. Later back at camp, you heard it again. "Commander." Simple, soft, no fanfare, but it hit differently. Because you remembered when that word meant someone who punished you, someone who chose who would eat, who would kneel, who would stay behind. Now it meant something else. Someone who was followed, even when no one had to. Someone whose hands had been calloused in the same dust. That night you sat by the fire, cleaning your blade, your robe still damp. And the word rang again in your head, not with pride, but with weight. Commander. It meant responsibility. It meant memory. It meant you couldn't disappear anymore. You couldn't hide in the crowd. Because now, when things went wrong, they would look at you, and you would look back, not because you wanted power, but because you had been shaped to carry it. 1 order at a time, the door creaked like it always had. You remembered that sound, wood swollen by heat and memory hinges rusted from years of silence. You stepped inside. Same stone walls, same chipped basin in the corner, same hooks on the post, one of them slightly bent. Your old mat was gone, replaced, but you knew exactly where it used to be. The room was smaller now, not because it had changed, because you had. You walked to the wall where boys once scratched lines, notches to mark time marks, to say, "I'm still here." Some of yours were still visible, faint, but there. You ran your hand over them, rough, like the voice you once had before command softened it into steel. Outside, new recruits shouted, their voices cracked like yours once did, trying to sound braver than they were. One of them looked in, a boy with a face full of dust and fear. He stared at you. Not with curiosity, with recognition, not because he knew your name, but because he saw something in you he was trying to grow into. You nodded. He disappeared. You turned back to the room. It smelled the same, leather, sweat, ash, but you didn't belong here anymore. This wasn't your place. This was the shell that had once held you. Now you carried it inside. You stood there for a moment longer. Then knelt, not in prayer, not in exhaustion. In memory, you touched the floor exactly where your head had once rested during those first nights of fear, where you had once curled into yourself unsure if you'd make it to morning. And you whispered, "Thank you." Not to the room, to the boy you had been, the one who didn't run, the one who didn't break, the one who quietly chose to stay. You stood, straightened your back, walked out through the same door, but this time it didn't close behind you. Because you no longer needed it to. It happened fast. Too fast. A duel, part of the final drill. One-on-one, no practice blades. Real steel, no room for mistake. The boy across from you, not a stranger. A fighter, one who once mocked your stance, one who once stole a ration and blamed you. There was no love between you. But this was not personal. It was protocol. He moved first, quick, aggressive, a downward cut meant to rattle, not kill. You deflected, slid, countered. The rhythm was familiar muscle, more fluent than mind. Dust rose with each step, eyes locked, no breath wasted. Then he slipped. Just for a moment, 1 foot on uneven stone, his weight shifted, and in that instant you were inside his guard, sword at his throat. He froze, not out of fear, out of knowledge. He knew it was over. Your blade hovered, 1 breath away, a line drawn across his future. Your arms remembered what to do next. The finishing strike, the lesson. The end. But you didn't move. You held the sword, tight, steady, and then you lowered it. Not as a show, not for forgiveness. Just enough. His chest rose, once, twice. Then he dropped his blade. Silence. The trainer stepped forward, his eyes unreadable. But he didn't scold, didn't question, only said noted. That was all. You turned, walked away. Not in victory, in something quieter. Later, the boy found you by the well. He didn't say thank you, didn't offer his hand, just stood beside you. You passed him the water, he drank, nodded, and you understood. In this place where pain proved worth, where power was earned through blood mercy, was the one thing no one expected. And so, it mattered more than all the blows. That night you cleaned your blade slowly, not because it was dirty, but because it had done something different. It had stopped, and in doing so, it had drawn a line, not on a body, but on who you were becoming. The courtyard was tense, not with shouting, not with violence, with quiet. A silence, thick with watching eyes, unspoken, challenge and the heavy knowledge that someone would have to break it. You stood in the middle. On your left, the commander from the northern barracks, precise, methodical, the one who'd trusted you with the sealed scrolls. On your right, the officer from the inner gate, unpredictable, blunt, the one who called you useful but never by name. Both men gave orders, not at the same time, but nearly. "Take the squad to the watchtower," said one. "Secure the south passage immediately," said the other. Same tone, same rank, same expectation. Your unit waited, 12 boys behind you, looking at you. Because you wore the sash now, because your word moved them, you hesitated one breath. Enough for them to notice. The officer narrowed his eyes. The commander folded his arms. Each thought you'd obey him. Each expected you to know your place. But what if that place was between them? You considered both orders. The watchtower was strategy. The south passage was reaction. One played the long game. The other feared the shortcut. You made your decision. Not with words, with movement. You turned your shoulder, tilted your chin just slightly toward the north. "Watchtower," you said, calm, firm, then turned your back on the other man. No anger, no apology, just choice. You heard the intake of breath behind you, the officer's short, sharp, but he said nothing. Because he knew what this meant. You weren't choosing against him. You were choosing for the mission. And more than that, you were choosing as a commander, not a messenger, not a student. Someone who weighs, someone who leads. Your men followed without question, even the youngest, even the ones who looked back once. Later that evening, you received no punishment. But you noticed your name wasn't called for review. Your quarters weren't checked. The officer avoided your eyes. The commander nodded once. That was all, but it was enough. That night, as you laid down your sword, you remembered the feel of both orders in the air, heavy as heat before lightning. And you remembered how, for the first time, you didn't flinch at choosing. Because command isn't about always being right. It's about being responsible when no one else wants to be. And standing between two orders, you became your own. The ink was fresh. The quill sat sharp and ready. The parchment smooth, empty, waiting. You had been summoned to the scriptorium, a room you rarely entered, too quiet, too clean. But today, they handed you the record book, a small stack of thin reports, and a simple order: copy what matters. You sat at the lone desk. Sunlight filtered in through slats in the stone dust, dancing like whispers above the table. You opened the first report. A patrol, routine, 3 names, 2 returned. The cause of absence lost in terrain. But you knew the truth. You'd carried one of the bodies. His hand had curled around yours in the final moment, not to hold, but to give something. A piece of twine, frayed, tied in a loop, no reason ever given. You placed the report aside. Opened the next. An injury log. One boy with broken ribs, another with bruises not explained by drills. It was written with words like disciplinary correction, but you remembered the screams. Not rage, not rebellion. Just confusion. You closed the folder. The third sheet listed inventory. Swords, bowstrings, salt, oil. But no mention of the missing boots, or the boy who'd gone barefoot for 3 weeks, or the girl who traded half her ration for a wool patch. You stared at the page. The quill was still dry. You dipped it, held it over the parchment, and paused, because writing meant recording. And recording meant fixing, like carving truth into stone. But what if the truth wasn't meant to be frozen? What if it was meant to live inside you? You set the quill down. Not out of fear, not out of laziness. Out of choice. You folded the reports, returned them to the drawer, left the page blank. When the scribe returned, he glanced at the parchment, raised an eyebrow. You met his eyes. "It's done," you said. He didn't press, just took the papers, placed them on the shelf, said nothing. But you noticed he didn't mark your name. That night, you lay awake. Not from guilt, but from memory. Because the page you left empty was full in you. And some days, the truest record is the silence we carry rather than the ink we leave behind. You knew him, not closely, not like a brother, but enough to remember how he stood in the heat, always with his hands behind his back elbows, slightly bent as if holding something invisible. He was older than you, not by much, but long enough in the ranks to have seen things you hadn't yet. Eyes that blinked slowly, like every thought had to pass through flame before reaching his lips. They sent him on a scouting run. Nothing unusual, routine patrol. He didn't flinch at the order, didn't glance your way. But when he passed you near the stables, he said, "If I'm not back before moonrise, wait another hour, then come." You didn't answer, didn't even nod. Because if someone heard, if someone asked, you could say truthfully that you'd said nothing. He left with two others, both younger, both nervous. They didn't return by moonrise. You waited. You watched the silver light climb the tower wall, watched it pool on the courtyard tiles. Still no sign. The order was clear. No action without command. You were a commander now. You had men to answer for, a chain of command, protocol, and still his voice echoed. Then come. You stood at the barracks door, hand on the hilt of your blade, body leaning forward. Then you stopped. One step, one breath. One choice. You turned back. You told yourself it was the right decision, that your responsibility was to the many, not the one. But when dawn came, they brought his body back. Dragged, dusted, alone. The others were dead too. But it was him, his eyes still half open that you couldn't look away from. They said it was an ambush, quick, efficient. But the tracker whispered that he fought to the end, took 3 down with him, left marks in the dust like someone had crawled not away, but toward something. Maybe toward help, maybe toward the chance you might still come. But you hadn't. You hadn't. At his burial, no words were spoken, no marker placed, just a pile of stones over a shape that no longer breathed. You stood there last. Longer than you should have, and whispered, "I'm sorry." Not because it fixed anything, not because he could hear, but because it was the only truth you had left to offer. From that day on, every decision weighed differently. Every hesitation tasted like dust, like silence, like him. Because there are many ways to take a life, and one of them is to let it be taken when you might have stood in the way. You were on watch. The cold kind, not sharp, not howling, just a slow, creeping cold that seeped into your bones and stayed. Your shift was the third, the dead one, when even the wind seemed too tired to stir. They gave you flint, a handful of twigs, and a single order. Keep it alive. You built the fire as you were taught. Pyramid of dry sticks, small pieces, first larger ones, when the core caught. The spark came easy, the flame didn't. It danced, coughed, almost died. You cupped your hands around it, protected it. Fed it slivers of bark, wisps of grass, and tiny offerings like secrets whispered into cupped palms. Hours passed. The fire never blazed, never roared, it just lived. Thin and stubborn, the others slept. You sat alone, knees pulled to your chest, watching the flame fight against the dark. It reminded you of someone, of yourself. How often had you almost gone out? How many nights had your light shrunk to nothing, only to glow again barely? A moth fluttered near. It hovered, then darted into the warmth. And for a moment, you weren't a soldier. You were a keeper of fire. A guardian of something that didn't ask to live but refused to die. When dawn came, you let the fire burn down. Just enough ash to prove it had been there. The trainer said nothing when he passed, just looked at the coals, then at you. But his nod lingered a second longer than usual. That day you moved through drills differently. Not faster, not louder, just steadier. Because now you knew not every battle is fought with blades. Some are won just by staying warm until the sun returns. You were out late. Not by punishment, not by command, just unable to sleep. The barracks felt too full, too loud even in silence. So you walked to the east wall, the one no one ever leaned on too close to the officer quarters. You stood there, arms folded, breathed the cold, let your eyes adjust to the half-light. Then you saw it, a shadow. On the far wall, long, still. It looked like you. Same height, same shoulders, same stance, but it wasn't yours. You moved your hand, so did your own shadow, but the other didn't. You froze, not in fear, in recognition. Someone else was watching like you. Someone else had stepped out of the noise, out of the rules, out of the rhythm. You waited. The shadow shifted. Not away. Forward. From behind a pillar, a figure stepped into view. You couldn't see their face, just the shape, familiar, tired, quiet. They looked at you, didn't wave, didn't speak, then turned and walked away, back into the dark. But for that moment you knew. You weren't alone. Not really. There were others like you. Still boys, maybe commanders, maybe broken, maybe something in between. But they were here, and they were watching. Like you, like a flame under ash, like something that couldn't be trained out. You went back to your mat, laid down, didn't sleep, but didn't need to. Because now, when you closed your eyes, you saw two shadows on that wall. And in a place built on isolation, even a second shadow was enough to feel less alone. The drills were the same. Dust, sweat, silence. Your muscles burned from repetition, your feet bruised from gravel. By the time the dinner bell rang, you didn't care what was served. Hunger was mechanical now, just another rhythm in the machine. But when you stepped into the mess hall, you froze. It hit you before you even reached the line. A scent? Warm, sweet, savory, not fancy, not rich. Just familiar. Your throat tightened, your feet slowed. It smelled like home. Not exactly, but close. Like the stew your mother made on market days, on days when the neighbors visited, when the fire crackled louder and your hands were still small enough to be guided. You took your portion, sat. The boys around you ate without hesitation. To them, it was just food. To you, it was memory. The first spoonful hit your tongue like a word you hadn't spoken in years. You chewed slowly, closed your eyes, and for one moment, you weren't in a fortress. You weren't a soldier. You weren't anyone's weapon. You were a child, knees swinging from a low bench, elbow deep in a chipped bowl, laughter behind you, hands ruffling your hair. The second spoonful brought tears. Not many, just one, falling without permission. You wiped it quickly, no one saw. Or maybe they did, but chose to let it pass. You finished the meal in silence, not because you were sad. Because you didn't want it to end. Afterward you waited. When the hall emptied, you approached the cook. An old man rarely spoke. You didn't ask questions, just said, "What was in it?" He looked up, paused, then said, "Dates, chickpeas, cumin, a little dried lemon." You nodded. That was all you needed. You didn't ask for it again, didn't expect it again. But that night, you fell asleep with warmth in your chest that had nothing to do with fire. And in your dreams, you were still holding that bowl, still chewing slowly, still letting yourself remember you had once been loved. They brought him in at dusk, hands bound, face bruised, dust in his beard and blood at the collar. A captured scout. Enemy. No name. You were assigned to stand watch over him that night. Nothing more. Just presence. He was tied to the central post, knees folded, back straight, silent. You didn't expect him to speak, and he didn't. For hours, neither of you moved. Only the fire cracked. Only the night whispered. Then, near midnight, he looked up. Just once, and your breath caught. Because he looked like you. Not identical, not like a brother, but close enough to make the world tilt. Same skin, same shape to the nose, same deep line between the brows. But it was his eyes that shook you. Wide, dark, watchful. You had seen those eyes in the mirror, on your worst days, on the days before you stopped asking questions. He looked at you as if he knew, as if he had walked your path in the other direction, and maybe he had. You watched him longer than you should have. He didn't blink. Didn't beg. Didn't even seem angry. Just tired. And suddenly you wondered. What if he had been taken instead of you? What if the hand that grabbed your wrist had grabbed his? Would he be in your shoes now? Would you be the one tied to the post? You stood, walked to the edge of the firelight, paced, trying to shake it. But every time you turned, his gaze was there. Not haunting, just echoing. Before dawn, you brought him water. You weren't supposed to. No one said you could. But you did. He didn't drink at first. He looked at you, looked at the cup, then back again. Then, slowly, he took it. One sip, no words. He handed it back. That was all. But something passed between you. Not forgiveness, not alliance. Just the quiet understanding that you could have been each other. When morning came, he was taken away. You didn't ask where, didn't want to know, but for days after, you saw his eyes every time you closed yours. And you carried a new truth, not heavy, but undeniable. Sometimes the enemy is just a mirror you weren't ready to look into. You didn't notice when it began. There was no thunder, no flash, no warning. Just a change. In the air, in the weight of things. You were sharpening your blade at the edge of the courtyard, rubbing whetstone against metal, the sound familiar rhythmic. Then nothing. No scrape, no echo, only quiet. You looked up and saw it. Rain, thin, soft, endless. Falling in sheets, so fine you could barely hear it. It didn't slap, didn't strike. It drifted, like mist with purpose. You stood, felt it land on your arms, your face, your lips. Cool, clean, kind. The boys around you paused too. None ran for cover, none shouted. They simply stood. Let it fall. You walked to the center of the yard, looked up. The sky was pale, gray like old linen, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt gentle, and something inside you loosened. Something that had been pulled tight for too long. You let the blade fall to your side, dropped to your knees, closed your eyes, and listened. Not to voices, not to commands, to yourself. To your breath, your heartbeat, the soft patter of water on skin. And in that moment, you didn't feel like a soldier, didn't feel like a commander, didn't feel like anyone they made you become. You felt human, alive. You stayed like that until the rain stopped, until the sky broke open and the sun returned shy and slow. You stood, your clothes clung, your hair dripped. But your eyes were clear. Someone passed you a dry cloth. You nodded, didn't speak. Because sometimes the greatest mercy comes not in words, but in silence shared with sky. And on that day when the rain fell without sound, you heard everything you'd been trying to forget. You were half asleep, the kind of sleep that's not really sleep, just breath, just heartbeat, just the weight of the day slowly peeling off your skin. It was the middle watch, quiet, still, too early for drills, too late for nightmares. Then you heard it, soft. Not a cry, not a footstep, a whisper. Your name, once, barely. You sat up, eyes not quite focusing, body unsure if this was dream or trick. You waited, nothing. Then again fainter, your name. But not in urgency, in warning. You stood, bare feet to stone, the chill grounding you. The others were still asleep. You walked slowly, following the sound. It drew you past the basin, past the broken shutter, toward the lower hall. And then silence. Just air. Just dark. You stood there confused. Then came the crack. Loud, final. Stone, shifting. The ceiling beam in the barracks, the one by the far wall, gave way. It didn't shatter. It collapsed, quietly, deliberately, right onto the space where your mat had been. Where you had been, minutes ago. The dust rose. Someone screamed. Chaos. You just stood there, frozen, covered in ash that hadn't touched you. They pulled the boys out. No one died, but injuries, shouts, a gash, a limp. The commander asked where you had gone. You lied, said the latrine. Said you couldn't sleep. They believed you. No one asked about the voice. But you remembered, because no one had called you by name in days. No one would have whispered like that. Not in that tone. Not at that hour. So what was it? Memory instinct. Ghost. You didn't care. It saved you. And from that night on, when the wind rustled just right, you listened closer. Because sometimes life doesn't shout to be heard. Sometimes it only whispers. And if you're quiet enough, if you're honest enough, you'll hear it. And you'll move. And you'll live. The order came at noon. Simple, direct, final. Take him outside the east wall. End it. Leave no mark. The man was kneeling, wounded, unarmed, eyes already far away. Not a soldier, not a spy, a deserter, one of yours. You didn't know him well, but you knew his face. He once held the door open with his back during a sandstorm so the younger boys could get inside. That was all you remembered. You took the blade they gave you, not your own, a duller one, standard execution steel. You led him through the gate. No one followed, no one needed to. The desert stretched before you, flat, wide, unforgiving. He didn't beg. He didn't ask. He only said, "Thank you for not tying my hands." You nodded, didn't speak. The spot was already chosen. A pile of loose stones, a dry bush nearby, no shadow. You told him to kneel. He did. You stepped behind him, lifted the blade, and stopped. Not because you were afraid, not because you had doubt, but because you heard something. Not a voice, not a sound, just silence, but a kind that asked a question. Will you be this man's final enemy, or his final witness? You lowered the sword. He didn't turn, didn't move, just sat there waiting. You walked 10 paces to the left, found a patch of earth soft enough to give. You dug. With your hands, slowly. No tools, no urgency, just purpose. When the hole was deep enough, you returned. He turned this time. Eyes wide, but not in hope, in disbelief. You handed him the blade, hilt first. He stared at it, then at you. You shook your head. Then pointed to the pit. He understood. Together you buried the sword, covered it with dirt, then sand, then stone. When it was done, neither of you spoke. You turned. Walked back to the fortress. He didn't follow. You didn't expect him to. You passed through the gate alone. When the commander asked if it was done, you said yes. And it was. Because sometimes taking a life is easy. Letting it go, that's the part that carves you from the inside. And now, somewhere east of the wall, beneath a pile of forgotten stones, lies a sword that will never be used. Not in war, not in rage, not in fear. Because you buried it, and with it, the version of you that obeyed everything. The bells rang early that morning. Clear, sharp, not the kind used for drills. Ceremony. Promotion, recognition, the kind of event that happened twice a year and made the walls feel warmer even when the air stayed cold. You were not called. Your name wasn't on the board, no token under your bed, no nod from the quartermaster. Others received theirs, polished boots, new sashes, fresh scrolls with their names in careful ink. They lined up inside the great hall. The banners were hung, brass polished, a bowl of oil burned at the center of the room, smelling of spice and memory. You stood in the courtyard, back straight, hands behind you, watching. You could have looked away, walked off, pretended not to care, but you didn't. You stood still as the names were read, one by one. Some you remembered training beside, others barely known. Applause, salutes, words of honor. You listened, not bitter, not broken. Just quiet, because you remembered something they didn't. The mission no one spoke of, the boy you buried, the sword you chose not to raise, the scroll you burned without question. The day you returned alone, boots torn, coat, wet with someone else's blood, no witness but the dusk. You never expected reward. But for a moment, a small part of you asked, do they know? Did anyone notice? No answer came, only wind sweeping dust across the floor, lifting the edge of a forgotten cloth. After the last name was read, the oil in the bowl flickered, then dimmed, and that was that. No speech, no closing, just dispersal. The boys emerged, some proud, some embarrassed. They didn't look at you. But one paused, the one with a crooked wrist whose life you once shielded with your own. He nodded. Once, and that was enough. Because you understood now, you weren't forgotten. You were elsewhere, beyond the stage, beyond the ink, beyond the part of the world that needed noise to believe. You walked back to your post, no badge, no rank, but your steps were steady. Because sometimes the truest honor is knowing you never needed a ceremony to prove you were already what they celebrated. You wrote it at night. After the bell, after lights out, when the barracks had finally gone still enough for your hands to remember how to shape letters, you found a scrap of paper, torn from the corner of a training ledger, still had numbers on the back. You didn't mind. You started with, to mother, then stopped. You hadn't said that word in years, not aloud, not even in thought, but it felt right. Your hand trembled after the first line, not from fear, from memory. You didn't write much, didn't write about war, didn't write about rank. You wrote about the way the sky looked the night before, how one star pulsed through the mist, how the sand smelled faintly of ash. You wrote about a boy who used to hum in his sleep, about the bread someone burned last week, about the ache in your shoulders that won't leave. Then you wrote about her, not the facts. Not her age, not her face, just the feeling. Of warm fingers in your hair, of a bowl pressed into your hands, of being seen not as strong, not as good, just seen. You signed it with your name. Not your number, not your rank, just you. Then you folded it, tight, neat, small enough to disappear. You kept it inside your sash for 5 days, touched it every morning, read it once at night. You told yourself you'd send it. You even reached the courier post once, held it in your palm. But when they asked name for the destination, you stayed silent. Because you didn't know where she was, if she was, and maybe you didn't want to. Because if the letter went and never came back, you'd know. You weren't ready for that. So you didn't send it, you kept it. And eventually you buried it, near the place you first trained, under a stone shaped like a heart that had cracked. You never told anyone, but years later, when someone asked, "Did you ever write to your family?" you answered, "Once," and that was enough. Because sometimes a letter isn't meant to arrive. It's meant to remind you that somewhere in the fire, you still knew how to speak gently. Even if no one heard, you didn't know what woke you. No bell, no shout, no cold wind against your face. Just a breath. Deep, even, whole. You opened your eyes slowly. No sharpness in your joints, no ache in your back, no dream clinging to your ribs like wet cloth. Only stillness. Only morning. You sat up. The mat beneath you felt soft, not in fabric, in memory. You rolled your shoulders. No pop, no sting. You pressed your palms together. They met easily, without the usual tremble. The boys were still asleep, their bodies tucked into the same tight shapes they'd always taken. One murmured in a dream, one snored, one reached reflexively for the blade beside him. But you didn't reach for anything. You just sat. Breathing, you looked toward the window where pale light began to spill through the cracks. Soft, not gold, not white, just clean. You stood, no wince, no stagger, and something inside you paused. Because you realized this was rare. You hadn't felt like this in months, maybe longer. A morning with no pain, no weight, no whisper from the night pulling you back down. You stepped outside. The courtyard was empty. You could hear birds. Real ones, not warning cries, not scavengers, just birds, singing nothing in particular, just being. You tilted your head back. The sky didn't look like a ceiling. It looked like air. And for the first time in what felt like forever, you smiled. Not out of joy, out of surprise. Because you had forgotten this feeling. Not peace, not freedom. Just absence. Absence of fear, of pressure, of remembering. A blank page in a book full of scars. You didn't speak. Didn't need to. You just stood there in a body that didn't hurt under a sky that didn't threaten and let it be. Because you knew it wouldn't last. The pain would come back. The commands, the shadows. But today, there was nothing wrong. And for a soldier, for a survivor, for someone like you, that was a kind of miracle. You don't remember the first command you followed. Not clearly, not the exact words, but you remember how it felt. Like shrinking, like folding yourself to fit a shape that wasn't yours yet. And now, after everything, you wonder, was it ever yours? You've held steel, you've buried it, you've led others into places where only silence returned. You've obeyed orders that made your breath catch, and disobeyed others that made your hands shake. You've watched friends vanish without a sound. You've chosen who stayed and who didn't. And somehow, you're still here, still waking up, still remembering names no one else speaks, still folding robes with the same crease, not for precision, but for something like ritual. No one trained you for this part, the after. The echo. The nights when no battle came, but your chest still carried armor. The days when praise felt heavier than blame, when someone called you commander, and all you could think of was the boy who didn't make it past the second trial. You've seen what discipline does to a body, how it sculpts, how it silences. But no one talks about what it does to memory, how it edits, how it clips the laughter from your childhood, but leaves the ache of missing it. You've eaten food with no taste. You've smelled rain that reminded you of a garden you're no longer sure existed. You've slept through thunder, but woken from the sound of paper tearing because it reminded you of someone's last breath. And still you keep going, not because you believe in what they told you, not because you hunger for rank, but because somewhere, in all the orders, in all the bruises and drills and morning marches, you found something solid, something stubborn. A self, small, quiet, hard to see, but yours. It hums when you spar with someone who's learning. It stirs when you break protocol to pass water to a fading boy. It burns slow and deep when you stare too long at the place where someone used to sleep and no one asks why it stays empty. You've learned what a body can endure, but you've also learned what a soul bends around. How regret makes a good pillow if you fold it just right. How guilt weighs less when carried in silence. How mercy, when chosen in the moment, doesn't make you weak, it just makes you remember. They trained you to forget. But you didn't. You remember the first song you hummed, and how no one stopped you. You remember the crack in the bowl you washed every morning, and how it reminded you that even clay can hold water if the break is sealed right. You remember the man whose eyes looked like yours, the boy whose letter you never sent, the sword you didn't raise. You remember the shadow that wasn't yours, the whisper that saved you, the fire you kept alive just long enough to see the sun again. And these aren't achievements. They're roots. They hold you, not to this place, but to yourself. You are not a title, not a rank, not a robe. You are the sum of quiet choices no one ever praised you for. The weight of every no you whispered in your chest when everyone else said yes. The softness you didn't kill, the parts of you that survived, not in spite of the training, but alongside it. They made you into a weapon, but somehow you stayed human. Even if only just. Even if only in the moments no one else saw. And now, what comes next? You don't know. You're not certain if this path leads anywhere gentler, if there's a place for someone like you outside these walls. But you do know this. You're no longer lost. You know who you are. Not because someone handed you a name, but because night after night you sat with your own silence and didn't run. Because you buried what needed to be buried and carried what needed to be remembered. And because when the time came you chose, not the easiest thing, not the cleanest thing, but the truest. And that is enough. You sit now somewhere quiet. No sword, no command, no bells in the dark. Just your breath, soft, even, enough. You don't look back, not because there's nothing worth remembering, but because you've already carried it with you, all of it. The dust, the names, the silence, the mornings that hurt, and the one that didn't. You are not who you were, not the boy taken, not the shadow trained, not the hand that once trembled before a blade. You are what remains when the last order fades, when the noise ends, when the world finally lets you rest. And now you can. Close your eyes. There's nothing left to prove, nothing left to protect, nothing left to hold. Only sleep, only breath. Only you, still here, still human, still enough.